Hey guys, welcome back to the podcast. I do still have much t-shirts available if anybody else wants any. Our next guest is gonna be Joel Thomas. He does the Feed the Rabbits podcast under Tony Occult Media. But I really been enjoying the podcast and his music, so I hope you guys enjoy the episode. There was some technical difficulties at the end. It wasn't syncing with the lips and the voice. So besides that, I hope you guys enjoy. Give me some feedback. Let's get into it. Alright. Hey man, welcome to the podcast. I call it the Oddball Odyssey. Do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself for the guests?
Yeah, I'm Joel Thomas. I have a podcast called Free the Rabbits Podcast. It's under Merkle Media, which is a media company which does a lot of different things. We do films, we do music, and there are several podcasts underneath it. The biggest one being The Confessionals, which is one of the biggest paranormal podcasts in the world. And Tony Merkle runs that, really good friend of mine. And I've been doing this podcast for a little over a year, but I've had my hands in tons of different podcasts and things over the past 4 to 5 years. Been doing music for about 20 years, and I've been in films now for about three. And I got a new film coming out this Sunday called The Meadow Project, and we had to sign some NDAs to go out to this pretty exclusive area where this other paranormal team's been researching for about 10 years. So we went there, we saw some very strange things, we got some interesting things on camera, and it's a fantastic documentary. So we're excited for that. And then I've got another documentary coming out in the fall called Crowley's Melonheads, Children of the Beast. And that's on the back of about 2.5 years of research that I've done connecting Crowley to cryptids and specifically the Melonheads of North America. So it's going to be very interesting. I traveled to 4 different states for that. I've got several people that other people might know of. Isaac Weishaupt. I've got Juan Ayala on there. Tony Merkel's on there as well, and the rest of the team. And we interviewed a bunch of different people who have seen melon heads in the modern era. So it's very interesting. It's going to be a good one too. So that's pretty much what I've got going on currently. And I'm always expanding. I've got some other projects I'm working on behind the scenes, but I haven't told anybody about those yet until I get closer to those coming out. But they're a little bit different than some of the things I've done so far. So stay busy.
Yeah, it definitely sounds busy. That melon, not melon. The Meta project sounds really interesting. I want to check that one out. I started listening, following the Cryptid Huntress through Tony, and she talks about it too, seeing that portal. That'd be real interesting.
Yeah, the portal video is in that film, so it'll be the first time that anybody's seen the cube portal that they've been talking about for several years. And Trey, who leads that team, he wrote his first book on the Meadow Project, and he's been on tons of different podcasts talking about it. And they've talked about this portal a lot, plus other things, and they've given us permission to finally show that footage that they took years ago. And it's going to be in conjunction with new footage that we also took while we were there. So it's going to be a lot of fun. We had a lot of fun doing it. We were out there for a week, and that's typically what we do when we go on these trips. We just got back from Wisconsin. We went to Bray Road and we went hunting the Beast of Bray Road. So we actually stayed on a property of a gentleman who has seen this dog man on his property. So we actually stayed there for a week on the property, and we had some strange things happen on that trip too. So definitely we got a lot in the works when it comes to films. But yeah, the Meadow Project is gonna be a lot of fun. Definitely check it out. Its premiere is this Sunday, the 27th. You go to moment.co/ the Meadow Project, and you can be a part of the live premiere. Plus, we're doing an hour or so Q&A afterwards. The main people that are a part of the film. So I'll be a part of it, Tony will be a part of it, Trey and Ward, and we'll all be answering questions to the people that watch the film.
Yeah, definitely check that out. I did watch was it Destination Dogman and that little trailer for the Seattle tapes ones you guys are doing. I want to check that one out when it comes out.
Yeah, for sure.
So, one of the topics, if you want to just go in order, is religion. I feel like I'm on a bit of a journey to try and find God. So, as somebody who's a fan of yours, been really enjoying the music and the podcast for the rabbits. The full part of Jesus's bloodline was really interesting.
Yeah.
And that plays a bit of a role just thinking about religion. Um, I did go to church a little bit in high school because I was
Hmm.
dating a girl,
Yeah.
and I did get baptized, but I tried to keep an open mind, but it didn't really settle. But after listening, to you guys, you and Tony on the shows, after I want to say since about like 2022, I've been listening. I've
Hmm.
been kind of rethinking about it. So, anybody that's trying to find or get closer, what would your advice be?
It's a tough
As
one because
somebody
I
who went
think,
through what you've gone through with the
yeah, for
supernatural.
sure. I think for me, it was a full circle moment because I started out in the church, grew up in the church. My dad was a pastor, still is a pastor. And I don't have any real negative memories of the church. A lot of people that turn from the church have negative memories, or they have someone that did them wrong in the church, or turn them off from Christianity specifically. And I completely understand. I've been there too. So I definitely have seen that part of it. But I can say, me growing up, there were some other things that drew me away from the church. There were some things within my family that did really make me rethink, did I want to follow this path or not? And then some of it too was just pure selfishness, that I wanted a very negative thing out of life. And at that time, I believed, and I still believe, that there were negative entities that could have given me that if I would have continued going down that path. But I ended up at a crossroads where I had to decide whether I was going to be there for my kids or whether I was going to, and I put this in quotations, sacrifice them, not literally, but basically sacrifice them by not being in their lives and going down that path and having an opportunity to chase the things that I wanted to chase in the music scene. And at the time, I was a Freemason as well. So I was trying to work my way to this level of fame and fortune. And I say that on the surface level because really what I was seeking was the esoteric knowledges, the hidden knowledges. To me, that was the most attractive part of it. Yeah, the power and all that comes with it, right? But to me, it was, I wanted to learn the things that I wasn't allowed to learn growing up. And my dad, interestingly enough, also came out of the same type of background as that. He actually was this close to becoming a part of the, at the time, large Church of Satan in Texas. And he had a moment where he almost unalived himself. And as he was on his way out the door to purchase barbiturates to take and overdose, he turned on the TV just haphazardly. And on the way out, somebody said on the television, "Does anybody out there need help?" And it was a preacher. And my dad actually gave his life to the Lord in that moment and changed his entire life from almost going down a very, very dark path and almost, unaliving himself to then, changing his entire course. And for me, when I got older, again, I was chasing the music scene, and I believed that to really get to the precipice of what I wanted to do, I felt like that I needed to work in conjunction with these negative entities to get that. And I do think that that door is open for people that are trying to achieve those things. However, I'm also, and you do listen to my shows, so you know how I feel about everything being fake. Everything's not fake. So I don't think that every musician is in league with some negative entity or every celebrity or whatever, right? Sometimes they're just a product of the machine. So sometimes the machine will have you do certain things and you might not even care about what you're doing, especially if you're getting paid to do it, right? Hey, go put on these devil horns and do this music video, and this will create a reaction when we put it out. So a lot of those people that do those things don't really care. They're getting paid and they think that it's art, but then there's a machine behind it that knows exactly what those symbols and what those esoteric analogies that are being put out through the music videos actually are. Me, I wanted to be one of those people that understood what those things were, help create those things, cultivated, and then brainwash the masses. I know that sounds awful, for somebody listening to it right now, but to me, I got so tired of the sheep And I was in a very dark place in my life, and I wanted to control them. I didn't want to be one of them that was controlled. I wanted to be the person controlling it, because if I understand how the world works, I'd rather be the person that's moving the puppet strings than being the puppet. And again, I came to that crossroads in my life, and I wasn't ready to turn to God right then, Alex, but I can tell you that my parents had instilled enough morals in me that I wasn't going to turn my back on my children, and I wasn't going to turn my back on my family. So that sent me on the road to finding God. But that wasn't until many years later. And honestly, when 2020 hit, when the world kind of got shook up and people started seeing things a little bit differently, and during that time, I was very adamant about fighting the system, and I was in a different place than I am now with it. I do think there's a way to push back against the authority in an intelligent way and in a way that makes sense. But at the time, I was just balls to the wall, attacking the system, saying whatever I wanted. And during that time, I met Tony Merkel, and I went to Philadelphia, and I was in studio with him. I was actually his first in studio guest ever. And I told him my story, because that's when I started talking about Freemasonry, and I talked about some of the entities I was in contact with, and we got down that road. And I remember after all that, he was talking to me, and this was off air, and I remember him telling me that he's like, "You've told me your story, and you know where you've come from." And he's like, "I can see that you are on a different crossroads, essentially, that God has a plan for you, and if you accept his plan for you, then you will move into what you're supposed to do with your life." And I think that resonated with me a lot, because I was ready. I was ready to go down that path, but it needed to be the path that you feel prodded by God to, right? Nobody can tell you when to meet God, how to meet God. It's got to be because you want to, and then it has to be that you're seeking it out. And I think for me, I was at that moment, and then, I started, picking my Bible again, started reading the Bible. Also started understanding the Bible a little bit differently, and understanding that all those esoteric knowledges that the enemy shows people as this, oh, look at these secrets, come over here and get these secrets, you can have this occult knowledge and these, all these powers and whatever else that comes along with it. I realized that the Bible had just as much hidden knowledge within it. And I don't mean hidden in the sense that you gotta put together some sort of code to find out what it is, but I mean in the sense of there were things in the text that when you look at it from a supernatural lens, which I think that a lot of the modern Christianity that's permeated out there now has taken away from the supernatural aspects of the Bible. It's a supernatural book. I mean, Alex, we're talking about a being that created everything. I mean, I think all bets are off at that point if you take on board that, right? If you say that that's a viable thing, and there is a God that created everything, well, then all bets are off, because anything is possible at that point, because that's something that we can't even really wrap our mind around. And I think at that point, I started looking at the Bible through that lens. I started really digging into the Hebrew from the Old Testament and the Koine Greek in the New Testament, and really looking at some of the words and some of the passages and breaking those down, and understanding there was a little bit more going on with some of these fantastical stories that were already fantastical, but that were even more so. And then they started resonating with me personally, where it's like, how can I make this applicable to my life? And that's what I do on my show a lot. I try to give people whatever I'm studying, and then also show how you can make it applicable to your life, or how that, hey, this might be a dangerous way of thinking, or dangerous thoughts that are being put out there, or this is something that's actually been put out there for a long time, but it's resurfaced now, i.e. you brought up the bloodlines of Jesus, which has now become a big thing again, which it kind of happens in cycles, right? You got, when it really hit hard, I believe it was the 1960s-ish, 70s, when it really started coming around about Jesus and his children. Not that that idea hadn't been out before, but there were a lot of modern books that were written. And then, of course, in the early 2000s with Dan Brown, and then putting out the Da Vinci Code, and then all of these things. But now it's resurfaced in a whole nother way. Now it's, Jesus is an Arcturian alien, and it ties into the New Age and all these things. And if you have Rh negative, then you have the bloodlines of Jesus. Jesus. And I was seeing that pop up a lot. And I said, you know what? Let me go back through some of the research I've done before, and then let me really go deep and really break it down in a way that people can understand it and understand, where the idea comes from, who the players are and why that they would want to push this idea when in actuality, these bloodlines that they're protecting are something far different. But again, this all comes back around to me getting in the Word and understanding the Word. You'll find a lot of people that are against Christianity, that are against the Word of God, don't ever pick up the book. They may pick out a few verses here and there to prove a point that the Bible's wrong, but generally speaking, they don't really know the Word front to end to be able to speak to it in a way that's saying that, oh no, this is it. I get a lot of Gnostics that come to me and say that, oh, I know for a fact that Yahweh's evil and I can show you, but yet they only pull out a few verses, and then when you pull out the entire context of a chapter, they have no idea what you're talking about because they've never actually picked up the book. They listened to a person talk, or they read a book about a book, which you see a lot of people do too. And to be honest with you, I think that goes both ways, though. I also pick up a lot of books that I don't necessarily agree with, but I do it to obtain the knowledge to understand where people come from. And in that aspect, I think it's important to do, especially when I'm talking about the occult or the esoteric or Gnosticism. I need to understand those things thoroughly. So if I'm trying to debunk those things and then match it up against the Bible, I need to understand the two sides of it. So that's really what brought me on the journey I'm on now. But I can truly tell you, Alex, I found God, but I continually find him more, if that makes sense. It's not a thing that happens once and then you're like, I've arrived. It's something that you're perpetually evolving as a human being when you get close to God. And then you realize that he's had nothing but your best interest at heart, and that really that our fight against him a lot of times causes a lot of friction, a lot of problems. And not to say that you won't go without problems or things bad won't happen. That's the reality of living in a sinful world, and the reality of God giving us all free will. People will say all the time, well, if God was good, why does he allow all this evil to happen? Well, that's because mankind does evil. Naturally, that's our proclivity, is to go to something evil. And so if he gives us free will, then free will also is there to hurt other people. So at the end of the day, if he was to step in and stop those things, then free will doesn't exist anymore. Now we're just robots, and he might as well have just created us as mindless drones in the first place, which he never did. So that's the argument against that the evil God doesn't care about us. I think he cares about us at the root core. Now, I want to say this too when it comes to Christianity, that I don't think that everybody out there pushing the idea of Christianity is necessarily in the right either. And I do think there are a lot of people that are in the church or that are in the pulpit that are promoting things that aren't right. And you look at the way that Roman Catholicism happened and how it really turned more into a corporation over the last, couple thousand years, and what it's done as a whole. But also, I'm going to sit here and say that not everybody that's a part of Roman Catholicism's evil either. So that's not necessarily, but I can say at the upper tiers of that structure, they've definitely monopolized the idea of you need to come to man to get to God, when that was never the purpose. We have access to God, you and me, Alex, just by talking to him. He's right here with us. Like, we can literally talk to him and he's here. Like, he's in us. So like, if we look at it from that aspect, we don't need someone to broker our experience with God. And I think that's real Christianity, not the religion of Christianity. I'm not big on the religion part of it. I think that the idea of real Christianity is our relationship with Christ, and the fact that we are sinful. He came here, he died for us, rose again, and because he did that, he made it for us to have a direct communion with him, as opposed to the old ways when they had to sacrifice animals and it was a whole thing. Now it's been brokered and opened for us directly from God, which I believe was how it was always intended to be, and it eventually became that way. But again, I can sit here all day and put out apologetics and prove the Bible right, which I've got a lot of apologetics for that. But there's a lot of really smart guys that would come and probably in their minds eviscerate what I said, and then I could come back with more apologetics. And at the end of the root core is it's a it's a belief. It's a faith in him. And when you cross that threshold and you give your life to him, you will find that he seems to pop up way more in your life than you know. And you will start tapping into the Holy Spirit and what he's telling you and what he's moving you to do. And again, all these concepts are concepts in the Bible. They're right there. And it just takes you to read it, and it takes you to understand it. And then people will say, well, I don't really understand it. Well, understand what God's telling you. If you go into it with, I don't understand this, God, but tell me what you want to show me. He may be showing you something that's just for you, man. You may read a verse and I may read a verse and you may take it completely different because that's what he's speaking to you. And that's the beauty of the Bible. That's the beauty that I found in the Bible as well. So again, the idea of religion and Christianity and any other religion for that matter is very complex, but I can say that it's also very simple. And I think that religion has made Christianity more complex than it needs to be, when in actuality, it's just an experience between you and God and your creator, just you and him. And he's right there. Anytime that you talk to him, he's right there. He hears you. It's just that a lot of times we don't even know who to talk to.
Yeah, I got a tattoo on my arm of a broken compass and a quote from one of the Lord of the Rings books that not all who wander are lost. And I try to apply that now because you brought up like the ancient aliens, and that's kind of my mindset right around high school when I was trying to keep an open mind. But I was like, yeah, I don't know. And then I'm coming back around. So I do need to try and read the Bible. I did try and listen to it on the audiobook. I forget which chapter, but it was Exodus right about when they make the manna machine. So it's
Hmm.
still kind of early on, and I need to get back on that. But growing up, I always kind of believed magic was real. I always believed in cryptids, Bigfoot and stuff. So I kind of wonder why I didn't want to learn more about it. The occult side early on, because I was a very curious kid. I would just love to read about things. So I'm finding that really interesting now. And like you said, the secret knowledge, you gotta be careful being too curious. Um, and I do try and pray. I don't know really how to, but like you said, I just speak to him like, hey, this is what's going on. This is what could help. I'm still I still go back and forth when things do happen. Like I did wanting make more money, and then eventually I got more hours. I did cut back because I had a third child. Um, he's about 7 months now. Uh, so it's just one of those things where I'm like, would it have happened anyways? Because they said that they wanted to give it to me because they like my work ethic. Or did he make that happen? And that's kind of where I'm at too, that belief. Like, was it
Hmm.
him? Was it not? Would it have happened anyways? Because I think right now I'm more, I think the term is agnostic. I do believe in a
Hmm.
higher power, just not any one religion. Because my concept is that if we live on a 3D world, a fourth dimensional being would be able to move through time and space, being any when and anywhere it wants to simultaneously. A fifth would be able to see the alternate timelines, and then the sixth would be able to interact. So if you listen to like scientists that say there could be like a 12th or 13th, that's something that's beyond a comprehension. If there's a being up there, that essentially would be a god to us. So I do have like a lot more of a scientific kind of view on reality, but I'm open to learn about things. And that's why I
Yeah.
find your podcast interesting. And then, confessionals, they have a lot of stories too. People encountering dark spirits. That makes
Yeah.
me wonder.
And I do believe that there's a science to all of it. So I think that you're not wrong there. And I will say this, some of the brightest scientists in the world and even in the past, when you talk to those ones at the top, we're talking about the elite smart guys, they have always adhered to the fact that there is a God, there is a creator, that none of this could have happened without a perfect design to it. And I think that when you listen to those guys who have IQs well over 180, 190, whatever, that talk about these type of things, then it gives you a different perspective too, because they're looking at it from a scientific lens. When they're looking at certain things, they're saying, listen, there's no way this came from nothing. It's impossible. And some of those guys do adhere to a Christian worldview. And again, I'm not here to like push my Christianity on anybody, because I know that I hated it when people tried to push it on me and I didn't want it. So I do get that aspect too. It's something that is going to be visceral and real to you when it's real to you. And I think that seeking it out is important, because that, I believe, it will bring you to a place of where you understand it better. And I do believe picking up the Bible is important. And especially if you're seeking it out. You know, one thing that I have a tough time with is people who don't give Christianity a shot or hate it and have no idea what it actually is. But then again, I don't fault them for it either, because if you've had set amount of people that have come across in your life and they claim to be Christians, but they act nothing like what they should by saying that, that's tough too. And I've also been there. So I think that it does come from a place of, one, the Holy Spirit, God, will prod you at different times of your life. You seem to having been prod over the past couple years. And I believe that the next step would be to read through the Bible, would be to look at it from a supernatural lens. And I don't know how that's going to work out for you at all, and I have no clue, but I do pray that it brings you to that visceral encounter that I know I've had, and I know people who have gone down that path have had too. But at the end of the day, it's your personal experience, and nobody else can give that to you. And anybody that's in the church pulpit or whatever is telling you to pay this kind of money or you need to come to me or whatever, they're lying, because your personal experience with God doesn't need any of that. It's just you and him. And I think when we realize that it's an actual personal relationship that you have with your creator, and it's not some God that's sitting in some, like you said, 14th dimension that looks at us like, you know, ants and doesn't care. I think once we realize that it's far deeper than that, and even the reason that he created us far deeper than that. I mean, he created us in his image, which is wild to even think about. You know, our DNA is created with the DNA of God. So that's a whole other concept too. So when we think about it that way, he cares about us a lot. But he also cares about us so much, he gives us the ability to not choose him, which I think's also very fascinating to think about too. So again, I hope I answered some of your questions on that the best way I could. It's tough because everybody's got their own personal experience with God. And I know for me, I went through a really dark time, and finding God and being able to connect to my creator on a personal level is what really vaulted me forward in my path and what I knew I needed to do with my life. And, you know, even with the way I create music and podcasting and films, and everything changed. You know, I started looking about how I can actually help people. You know, when you find that experience with God, you start thinking about everything else but yourself. You start thinking about, what can I do more for my family? How can I get in the community more to help people? And I say that on my show a lot. If you want to fight the system, you do it on the boots on the ground. You actually go out and help people. You know, find a local community project that you can work for. Find some place, a soup kitchen, whatever you can that obviously can work within the time frame that you have. You know, I think those things are important, and I think that I started really understanding God more that way too, by understanding that that's how you really connect with people and then show them God, is by showing them love and compassion and the things they don't normally see in life. And I was very fortunate to have some people that showed those things to me. So I had a very different realization of God than I used to have. You know, whereas I thought God was this guy who just sat up there, didn't care, and just wanted to watch us fight it out for his own amusement. And I think that's tough, you know, when you have that worldview. And at that point, you know, that's a very nihilistic worldview. And at that, who cares? You know, who cares what you do? There's no good or bad. There's no nothing. Very Gnostic way of thinking too. And it's, you know, we're in a simulation and we're fighting to get out of the simulation. You know, we got to fight Yahweh, you know, and get past him. And if we ascend enough, we get to the Pleroma, and then we can meet the Monad and meet Sophia and all of these ascended masters. And but that seems like a lot of work, whereas real Christianity at the core is not a lot of work. It's very simple, but it's also so simple that it scares people because it's a responsibility that you're given to your creator, that you're going to live out your life to please him. And that is a big responsibility. That's when you start casting old things to the side, things that aren't good for you, things that aren't good for your family, and then you start moving forward in a more healthy manner. And again, it's everybody's own experience. So I can only tell you from my personal experience, that's what it's been, but everybody else has their own way of looking at it when they go through that experience.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm not trying to use it like as an example. It's more just, conversation for those
Right.
who aren't familiar, who are on, similar paths. It does for me. It does help a little bit to know that at least I'm kind of doing things right. Another thing I had growing up was, like most people, if he cared so much and was all powerful, why is there evil in the world?
Hmm.
It didn't take until probably about 2020 or 2021. I was watching a video. I was talking about, what was it, the Purgatory from Dante's Inferno, the
Yeah.
second book. And there's a moment in that when one of the souls he talks to asks that question, and he comes to the realization that it's free will. We
Hmm.
can, pick and choose to be selfish, to harm others for our own needs, and that was a good eye-opening point for me. It's like that makes a lot of sense. So that question was answered. But yeah, there's just a lot of things I don't know about the Bible to really commit right now, but I really do want that really like that direct, honest to God moment that to help cement it, because I do feel like I'm still on the fence a little bit, but I lean
Yeah.
towards he is out there than not. Um, but yeah, so I have ADD. I'm still kind of nervous.
No, you're
Um,
good, man.
but yeah, talking about free will, I do think, he nudges people, so I try to keep that open mind too. Um, because, I don't really know what my purpose is, but I do know what I'm interested in, like doing this podcast. You brought up doing films and documentaries. That's also something I'd be interested in doing if I can get more finance. Um, I'm from Arizona, so we have a lot of interesting places to go check out.
Oh yeah, you do, man. You got a
Uh,
lot in Arizona.
hmm
I got a new episode coming out next Monday, and I did it on Native American stargates, and there's a lot of very strange gateways and stargates out in Arizona, which
hmm
is pretty wild. That's connected to a lot of ancient Native American lore. And not only that, but I mean, giants have been seen in Arizona, all kind of things in Arizona, cryptids galore. So yeah, Arizona's a hotbed. It has been for a long time. I mean, you can track back the Anasazi there and all these different Native American tribes, the Hopi, I mean, all these different ones, and they have stories of so many different beings and cryptids. And the Hopi have the ant people, which look like grays, and they come from underneath the earth. They've got the serpent people, which are very similar to reptilians that come out from under the earth. You've got all these things that are in the Arizona area, among other states that are connected to Arizona. But
hmm
yeah, Arizona's a hotbed, man. It's a lot going on
Yeah,
there.
yeah. I've done two trip. Well, I didn't really do much in Joshua Tree, but I did do a camp out there.
Hmm.
And then me and my buddy went to Amboy just to sightsee a bit. We would love to do more camping. But yeah, I always forget how you say it because when I look at it, I think Mongolian. But we have like that Bigfoot type monster up there.
Hmm.
I forget his last name, but Nathan that Tony has his show says there's a lot of occult activity out here in like Havasu and then on the reservations. So
Yeah.
I'd love to plan more long trip camping trips out there to see. Me and my buddy was gonna see about driving because I'm in Yuma.
Hmm.
We were gonna drive up towards Snowflake where the Travis Walton incident happened and
Yeah.
just see what we can see at night. Maybe ask around, see about finding some properties to go to, um, if they will let us, or just you know pinpoint more, uh, some of the hot spots that other people see up there.
Yeah.
They just trying to find the time and money. Um, I had other thoughts about religion. I'm trying to think. It might come
I know
back.
you had asked about, did Jesus have
Oh yeah, because you had
siblings?
you were talking about the bloodlines. Well, I just meant like personal comments. But yeah, we can move on because I don't know how long I have you. Because you were talking about like the different bloodlines and stuff, and I
Hmm.
know in the past week, Jack Pacific asked that question, and he seems to be on the side that that they never consummated the marriage after Jesus. And I find that a little weird. I feel like I think I always think back to that Dogma with Kevin Smith.
Yeah.
To think that two people never got it on is kind of strange to me. But they see her as like the eternal virgin, the sinless. So what's your take on that? Do you think he did?
Now, are we talking about his mother Mary? Did she have other children in addition to Jesus? I think the idea is with the virgin birth was that Mary was a virgin when she had Jesus, but then she had more children with Joseph, who was her husband at the time, because Joseph took her on as her as his wife. They were already moving towards marriage, but when he found out that she was pregnant and that was from an angel, and he was basically doing it, he got married to her very quickly because obviously he didn't want, because of the culture in that day, for her to be seen as this pregnant person who wasn't married. And especially if she came out and said, well, there wasn't a guy that did it, I just got pregnant. So I do think she was a virgin with Jesus, but I do absolutely believe that she had children outside of that. And we know that verbatim from the Bible, and that's Matthew 13:55. And it says, isn't this the carpenter's son? Isn't his mother's name Mary? And aren't his brothers James, Joseph, Simon, and Judas? So we know for a fact he had four brothers per the Bible. So yeah, I completely believe that Jesus had siblings as far as what Mary had with Joseph after him. But I do think she was a virgin whenever Jesus was, however you want to say that it happened. There were so many theological debates on how it happened, but the best way I can say it is that God put Jesus there. He is God, so he just was there. He got inseminated, and he half of him is is God, and he was all God, all man, and that's the best way that I can explain that without getting super deep, all these different machinations of it. But if you're asking the question of did he have siblings, absolutely, and I think that if we look at Jesus's family bloodlines, the Desposini, yeah, absolutely. Those existed, and we know that during the early church that the Desposini were looked upon with a lot of reverence because his one brother James, as a matter of fact, all of his brothers didn't even believe who he said he was during most of his run. And they didn't believe it until it came towards the end before he died. And then they were able to take it on board. And then when he rose again, they said, whoa, this dude died and came back to life. When they saw that, James became one of the pillars of the church. And he led the Judaic Christian part of it. So these were the Jews who believed that Jesus was the Messiah. So the Judaic Christians were essentially taken under the wing of James, who was the brother of Jesus. But then you had the Pauline Christianity, which was geared more to the Gentiles, which weren't Jews, and Paul and Peter typically dealt with them. But they all convened together, James, Peter, and so did Paul. So they did convene a lot. Now, the Gnostics will tell you, and I talked about that in length in that Jesus Bloodline series, they'll tell you that James created Essene Christianity, and he, along with Jesus, who was married to Mary Magdalene, and they had children, that was this other version of Christianity that the Pauline Christianity and the Judaic Christianity pushed out of Jerusalem. So that's the story. But when you actually track it back and you look at it pretty deeply, that Essene Christianity was really more like a weird offshoot of actual Christianity. And this is before the Roman Catholic Church. So this is like the really grassroots movement of Christianity. A lot of people don't even know where the word Christianity came from. It was actually a slur that the Romans used against people who followed Christ. So it eventually became something that the people who followed Christ took on as a moniker. So it was actually something that got repurposed. So Christianity initially in its earliest forms was actually a slur. It was a negative term, and it changed over time. And obviously when the Romans came along and then Caesar, and they turned it into a state religion, then it changed its format, and then that's when Roman Catholicism really came into play, and then it became more of a structured religious movement at that point. And that's when you've seen way more variations of Christianity, because you had a lot of people that pushed back against the very corporate structure of what they were trying to create, and rightfully so in a lot of ways too. Not to say some good things didn't come out of Roman Catholicism, but for the at the root core, a lot of it wasn't created with good intentions. But I always argue that when it comes to the Word of God, when it comes to what God wants, God will intervene and God will protect what He has put there for us to receive. So I do believe that God has His hand on certain people's lives, and He pushes and prods people in certain directions. So even if someone meant something for evil, God can always use it for good. And I think that's something we have to look at too, even when it comes to some of these very evil groups of people who have tried to twist and manipulate, Christianity and God's word throughout time. And, the Gnostics are interesting too, because what's funny about the Gnostics and the whole Gnostic movement back then with the Cathars and the Essenes and the Manichaeans and all these different groups that came out of it, a lot of those groups were intertwined within the Roman Catholic Church behind the scenes. So that was really the hidden elite that were puppeteering both sides. It actually puppeteered them to fight each other. It operates a lot like wars do now, where you see that people will fight each other, and on the surface it looks like two countries are fighting, but there'll be some elites behind the scenes that are kind of puppeteering that action. And then of course there's a money structure that goes along with that too. It's just back then, in those times, things were fought more over religion back then, as opposed to now. We don't see a lot of that going on as much now on a global scale, like massive global scale. But back then it was. That's the holy wars, those type of things were centered around religion, and I don't think God was behind it at all. But again, to find those things out, you have to look at the layers behind the layers behind the layers, because it's very easy, if you wanted to say that Gnosticism's a right route to go, you could say, well, the Roman Catholic Church wiped out all these Gnostics, and that's really their big argument. But when you actually do the deep research and realize that a lot of those Gnostic groups were hidden within Roman Catholicism, then you start seeing the actual picture that this is just a manipulation and sometimes a cash grab, depending on the country that they were in. And to say that too, there were some Gnostic groups that were wiping out Roman Catholic groups in certain countries too, when they had the numbers. So it wasn't just that Roman Catholicism was wiping them out left and right. It just so happened that Roman Catholicism was pretty massive globally at the time, and it was easier to knock out some of their competition. And that's the sad reality of when it comes to the good part of Christianity, the real part of Christianity. The enemy, the Satan, Lucifer, whatever you want to call him, he and his group found a way very early on to integrate within it and then manipulate it. And then at the same time, show you this other side over here. Hey, look, we can give you the answers and the knowledge and the power over here. And then they intertwine over here into Christianity, and then they make it look bad too. So then it becomes this manipulation tactic. That's why I always tell people, at the root core of your relationship with God, it's you and God. And that's how you get to the real answers. And at the end of the day, you're never going to know all the answers. You're on a journey your whole life, and you're going to go through good swings, bad swings, all those things. But when you know that you have a creator there that's with you, that's working through you, you can get through it a lot better. And there are times that I've had some dark times in the past couple years. You know, I've even had a really rough stretch in the past few months with a lot of things going on with family members and just all kind of things that are uncontrollable. But I can say that through it all, with my relationship with God, I've had more of a foundation to deal with it than I would have before, where I would have just absolutely spiraled out into despair or whatever else. So uh, I hope that answers some of your question there. I know we started with, did Jesus have family members? And he completely did. But as far as him having an actual bloodline and him having children, I don't think so. I don't think there's any proof of that. I don't even think in the Gnostic text that they try to point to and say that he did, there's nothing verbatim in any Gnostic text. The Gnostic text of Thomas, Gnostic text of Mary Magdalene, nothing is stated verbatim that he actually did. It's all a very hidden, esoteric way that they try to explain it, and then they have these other documents that they hide and they bring forth and they say, oh, this is it, this is it. There's never been anything that's just like, that's it. And that also makes me wonder too, why is it so hidden? Why does it have to be so esoteric when Jesus was never a hidden person when he was here on earth? He said he was the Son of God. He said he was God. He proclaimed who he was. He was very adamant about that. So why would he have hidden him having children, or why would that be a thing? Well, the Gnostics don't believe he was God, so there's that. So they want to disprove his deity, and that's a big thing in the Christ consciousness movement that's going on right now, where everybody can become a Christ, right? We can all become a Mahatma, a secret chief, a ascended master. We can all get to these levels if we just do enough, if we do all these things. It's a very occult route. You know, you look at some of the guys like Aleister Crowley, Jack Parsons, uh, any of these guys, John Dee, we can go all the way back. They all have all these millions of steps and all these things to complete the magnum opus, and it's not that difficult. All you have to do is give your life to Christ and have a relationship with Him. And at the end of the day, it's very simple, but it's become overcomplicated. And sadly, a lot of people got involved with the church and also made it overcomplicated. So then it turns people off from the fact of even trying to go down the road of going to church. Why do I want to be a part of that? It seems so fake. And they're not wrong. A lot of it is fake, Alex. And I understand why people have reservations of going down that path. I was there for years, so I can completely understand where where they are in that. But I can say from somebody who's gone down the path and had that experience with God and had multiple experiences with God since, that I know that He's real. It's very visceral and real to me. And I know too that I've seen the negative side of it. I've seen entities in front of me, especially when I was going down a dark path, that spoke to me. So I know evil's there. So why would I suggest that good wasn't, if I've seen evil and talked to evil? But I've had those experiences with good and God, and I understand that He is actively chasing us. And I think that's the interesting part too, is a lot of verbiage from Jesus in the Bible that He's chasing after us. He wants us to trust Him. He wants us to understand how much He loves us. And I think that that's what I've understood more and more. And but again, I do understand people who aren't there, and I'm never here to look down on people that are quote unquote not Christian or anything like that, because man, I've been there. So I understand completely why people don't particularly want to go down a path of Christianity, especially when they see a lot of negative things come out of it.
Yeah, just circle back. I just thought it was weird, timing wise. You were covering the series about bloodlines, and then he,
Yeah.
he put the question on Twitter, and that was my understanding was that he did based on the scripture, which a lot of people were posting, like the one you just read. But it seemed like he's much more of a Catholic, but in his mind, yeah, they just after Jesus, they just never had sex, therefore he has no siblings. That the term they use is more like brethren, which could be like cousins or
Mm.
very minimum, maybe like step siblings. I'm like, as somebody, like I said, who hasn't read, who hasn't looked into this, I'm like, I think you're wrong, but I don't know.
Yeah.
And then I had a few points coming back. I do see that a lot on Twitter, the two sides of people using scriptures to be like, this is why Christianity is hateful and evil, and then the other side they use the same quotes being like, yeah, God says this, therefore I have to. And I feel like, obviously they're both wrong. I don't think there's that much hate for each other. I don't think that was his
Right.
thing. Um, so I just try to, not hate people, be a
Yeah,
good person in that aspect.
yeah,
And
absolutely.
then there's some clips that I see to bring up about like, loving God, that you have to love him or you're gonna go to hell. And I don't know if that's true too. It's mostly what you do that sends you there, not, loving him. Like you said before, you have that option to choose. He's not that much like, how would you say it, like demanding. It's not, love me or else kind of a thing. It's,
Hmm.
love me or don't. Um, but and then, coming back to the last point, and maybe we can move on to a few of the other things. Um, I did have a thought listening to the Bloodlines. I'll bring that up real quick. I just wrote that down. I do need to get better about taking notes. It's just really interesting to hear you talk. What do you think about the RH negative being like the original bloodline, having it be kind of reversed? Maybe that's why they have such a spiritual connection. That's much more of like the Adam bloodline, whereas everyone else is tainted.
Yeah, I think the RH negative concept is, man, it's super interesting. And I don't have the exact answer on where it came from. Nobody knows. Scientists
Hmm.
don't even know. I mean, we know 15% of the world has it, and we know in certain places of the world, like the Basque region, it's very, very high on the percentage scale. I think it's like 45%, 50% of the people have it in that area. And what's interesting is a lot of these areas that are very high percentage of people that have them in the world, we can track those back to where there were giant bloodlines and there were giants in the area, which I think is also interesting too. I lend to the idea that it's probably of some sort of giant Nephilim, Rephaim origin when it comes to the Rh negative, but I can't say for sure. And I'm not going to because I don't think any of us can. I think we can give our best guesstimations. I will say that the idea that it's Jesus's bloodline, and that was what even got me down the idea of even doing this 4-part series on Jesus' bloodlines. Was I was seeing a lot of people that have Rh negative claiming that they were from Jesus's bloodlines, and then I think I ended on my last part and I broke down the Rh negative, and I said, well, that's 15% of the world. You got to do the math. If there's 8 billion people in the world and you do percentage, well, that would mean that like what 1.2 billion people in the world have Rh negative and they're all from the bloodlines of Jesus. Doesn't make sense, especially if we look at the people claiming to have these bloodlines of Jesus. They're all in positions of power and they have power structures around them, and a lot of them do a lot of inbreeding to keep the bloodlines pure. So not that many people would have it. So now the other argument would be, is Rh negative some sort of bloodlines of the family of Jesus? Maybe, but I mean, would that give them some sort of special power? I don't know. I lend more back to the Nephilim part because we do know that the Nephilim had some very interesting things they were capable of doing because they came from these fallen entities, this intermingling between the Watchers and the daughters of men. So if that's the case, and you can call them whatever you want, you can call them extraterrestrials, you can call them subterrestrials, we can call them interdimensional beings. I don't care what you call them. I do adhere to a biblical worldview, but that doesn't mean that we can't look at them all as, the same thing. They've masqueraded as a lot of different things. But yeah, and who knows exactly how that happened? Did they have actual sexual relations with them, or is this some sort of DNA manipulation? Was it both? Were there different types of DNA manipulation throughout that helped create chimeras and other types of animal hybrids like dogmen and lion men and Bigfoot and all these different things? I don't know. I think it's up for debate. I know you had said you want to talk a little bit about cryptids. Well, cryptids is very interesting because no two cryptids are alike, and we don't know exactly where they came from. I know there's some people in the Christian supernatural camp that want to say all these cryptids come from Nephilim origins and they're all evil. I don't believe that at all. I think that's a stupid way of looking at it. And I don't think there's anything that we can point to scripturally and say that's it. And I know some people want to look at the story of Esau and say that Esau was kind of the first Bigfoot, and this is where these bloodlines came from with the Edomites. And I'm not saying they're not wrong either. I mean, there's some definitely some interesting correlations there, but is that the only type of Bigfoot? I think there's all kinds of different types of Bigfoot. I would argue that there could be a Bigfoot that's older than Adam, older than man, because I'm an old Earth theorist when it comes to Christianity. I don't believe that the Earth's only been here 6,000 years. I think biblically we can look at it, especially in the Hebrew, and show that it's been around for a long time. So was there an Earth with a civilization and all those things before Adam? Were there pre-Adamites? Were there angelic civilizations here, Mars, you know, Planet Rahab, which is a whole nother subject, which I've done. But all these different things that we look at and say, back to the bloodline part, you know, I lend, when it comes to RH negative, more towards this Nephilim aspect and this intermingling than anything else. But also, I don't think that that denotes that you can't get into heaven or some craziness that I've heard people say either. So I think that there are some interesting correlations with RH negative. There are some people that have it, and they'll say, man, I have a lot of paranormal experiences. I'm able to do things I can't explain. You know, but I seem to have some sort of supernatural factor around me, right? But then there's some people that have RH negative, don't have any of those experiences. So it does seem to be a higher uptick. So I can say that there are some things that we can point to and say, well, this is our best guess. And I think that's kind of where I'm at with the RH negative thing. I can't really give a definitive answer, but I would lean more towards this watcher and human intermingling aspect.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking. Not necessarily like continue our conversation more like the bloodline of Jesus, but I should clarify maybe more like the pure bloodline of like Noah. Maybe they
Mm,
started that, and then everything else got re-corrupted after the flood, with the intermingling. And you know, the cryptids. I think we live in a world, a strange world that there's a lot of plausibilities and possibilities. So I think a lot of the human cryptids that could be the humanoid ones could be a possibility because you know you bring up Genesis that they mated with men and beasts.
right.
But you know another podcast I listen to is you know Cryptid of the Corns guys, and I
Oh, I
kind of
love them.
fall similarly to believe what they think. I think it's an umbrella term. You know a lot of things what you said could be you know you know the first episode that I heard you on was the Old Earth, and I thought that was really interesting. And then there was one, I forget where it was, that was covering like an alien conspiracy that we are like the seventh iteration, and the people who built some of the ancient sites were like the fifth and sixth. And I think that could play a role, kind of like the pre-Adamites. What
Mm.
was God, you know, creating before we came about? And maybe they're just big animals too, natural animals, but maybe there's some that still have the Nephilim that can do the woo-woo stuff.
Yeah.
'Cause I think our world's layered, like going back to like the dimensions. I think a lot of it's like layered, and then it moves about like a tesseract. I think that's how you get, you know, certain portals, maybe the different dimensions. They timelines, you know, they clash sometimes with people. That's could explain the disappearances and you know things coming from ancient times into more modern times. That could be
Mm.
something to explain it too. So. I think there's a lot. It's very fascinating and interesting the rabbit holes you can go down trying to explain our reality.
Yeah, man. I completely agree with you, especially when it comes to cryptids. I don't think there's a definitive answer. And I'm really good friends with the guys from Cryptids of the Corn, and
Hmm.
I was just hanging out with them a week ago, and you know, we were talking about some of that too. And you know, they're very much like me, where we're very open-minded to a lot of different aspects of it. I mean, even you just brought up the woo. The woo could explain something like the fae or fairies that mimic certain cryptids as
Yeah,
well. So
that stuff too.
Maybe we've got more of a paranormal thing in some cases. I think you're right too to say, hey, it could be a big animal. Those could be very possible too. Could the Nephilim aspect be possible? Yeah, that could also be possible. So if you got all these different aspects going on, that's why people have all these different unique experiences. And we're just going to bring Bigfoot up as the example. There are so many different unique experiences with Bigfoot that you can't nail it down to one thing. You got one Bigfoot somebody sees, starts to walk off a cliff and just keeps walking across the air like it's nothing and just keeps going. How do you explain that? How do you explain the Bigfoot that comes off a UFO with grays? How do you explain the Bigfoot that is like an animal but more humanoid and is hanging out with his family? And this lady goes down to the creek, and as long as she doesn't pass over the creek into their spot that's designated, they let her watch them. I don't know. I can't explain any of that stuff. There's no way to. And I guess for me, one of the things that bothers me a lot is people that think they got it figured out with anything like this stuff. Nobody does. Like we can sit there and say, I've done tons of research on this, but until we have a body in front of us and we're able to really look at the mitochondrial DNA of something, we're never really going to know. And I can say I saw something, and I've seen some really wild things in the woods, and I can say I saw something, but at the end of the day, I'll never know exactly what I saw. And I think that's something important too. People will see things and it might not be what they think they saw. It could be something masquerading as something, and it might not even actually be that at its root core. It could be something that's just shapeshifted into something else, and it could be something completely on the paranormal scale as opposed to something actually physical.
Yeah, people, they bring that up. The cryptid and coons, people are on the professionals about, masks, things wearing the Bigfoot as a mask. The UFO one, it might have been the cryptids or the corn guys, but I forget where that said maybe they abduct them too to experiment or get DNA from them too, like they do us.
Interesting.
That's one possibility, but
Yeah.
who knows? Um, we did touch upon it earlier. You guys do a lot of documentary and looking for these things. How much fun is that? 'Cause,
Oh, I love it. So I grew up in the mountains of Georgia. So I grew up on the side of a mountain. I lived in an area where, people talked about Bigfoot. I never saw anything as a kid, but, it was definitely at the end of the Appalachian Trail. And my parents were very open-minded growing up. So I was very fortunate in that aspect because my mom actually gave me two of my books that I read as a kid when I was like 6 or 7. And one of them was called Bigfoot's Breath, and the other one was called The Portal. So I was reading about portals and Bigfoot back when I was like 6 or 7. And I was always fascinated with this stuff. I used to watch old documentaries back in the late 80s, early 90s of Bermuda Triangle and UFOs. And my parents were very open-minded to all this stuff, and they would always look at it through a biblical lens and how this works in the spiritual world. But yeah, I am very fortunate and blessed to be able to hunt these things and look for this stuff for a living. And it's a lot of fun. We went on Expedition Dogman, which is our first one, and I had a very unique experience in the woods that I still can't explain to this day. And it was pretty wild. And then every journey we've been on since, somebody's had something happen or multiple things have happened. So, the last one I went on Bray Road, I had a very spiritual experience, and people will understand when they watch the film, but that was probably one of the most spiritual experiences I've ever had on a trip like this, which I wasn't there looking for a spiritual experience. I was there looking for a werewolf or a dog man. So I had a very unique experience there. I'll say the Crowley's Melonheads film, we probably have some of the most interesting footage ever captured when it comes to catching weird things, for sure. This last project that we got coming out for the Meadow Project, we got some very interesting stuff there. We also have a very interesting story that's built around me and one of my experiences, and it's very different than anything that's ever been shown on a film like this. It's a very honest take on what we see or don't see when we're in the woods. And I think for me, it was very important to let people see that and understand that. And I don't want to give anything away, but the film has definitely got its own feel to something like this. So every film we've been on, you know, the film we did out in Utah, which we were staying out at Space Wolf Research, which butts up right next to Skinwalker Ranch. I mean, we had some wild stuff happen there. I mean, for an hour and a half, we saw 20, 30 UFOs in the air moving around in all kind of directions, and they weren't satellites. And, you know, we saw that happen for over an hour, hour and a half. I've seen in my life, I've seen some very, very strange UFOs in the sky. So, yeah, I know all this stuff exists. I've seen it, and I don't know exactly what it is, but the fact that we get to go out and look for these things and experience this stuff is a lot of fun. I enjoyed a lot.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm starting my journey to kind of venture out. Um, there was I don't recommend it, but I did camp out on the side of the road out by, was it Stardust Ranch? It's kind of similar to
Yeah.
Skinwalker. I didn't really ex
Stardust is wild, man.
Yeah,
That's a
that's a wild
wild
story.
ranch, man.
Because I wasn't on the property, I didn't really experience anything
Mm-hmm.
major, other than there was one point I could have swore I heard like the gravel crunch, like somebody took a
Mm-hmm.
step. But there was nothing around. That was kind of eerie. And then there's some mountains up by Goodwill by Phoenix I've ventured into. I do have a footprint I can send you, but the guy that recommended it said it just looked like a large coyote. But there are some
Mm-hmm.
dogman sightings out that way. So
Interesting.
like he said big if, but if it was a smaller one.
Yeah,
But it most likely just a big coyote. It was just weird. It's just the one footprint though in the picture.
that is weird. And sometimes you'll see that with dogmen and some of the footprints. And I've seen some footprints, some massive canine footprints that I've had hunters look at, and they're like, "Man, that's no coyote. That's not even a wolf. That's bigger than that. We don't know what this is." So I've seen some massive prints. You know, a lot of people that look at prints will immediately go to something that they know. So I'd be interested to see the print that you had. I'd be interested to see how big it actually was too.
I use my foot as an example, and it looks comparable to just like the first half of the boot that is shown.
Okay.
Yeah, I was walking down like a dried riverbed, and I saw other like dog prints, and they weren't nearly as big. I'd have to
Right.
find it, or I'd show you now. It's in my camera.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, like I said, I do want to go more up north into the mountains. Sedona's a huge area I want to go look
Yeah.
at. It's just about trying to plan it because I do want longer times. But like I said, me and my buddy might do an overnight just to
Hmm.
see and maybe find some more areas. But I really do want to see one, a Bigfoot or a Dogman. Dogmans are terrifying, but I've always been fascinated by like werewolves, so Dogmen intrigue me.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just did an episode on werewolves and the psychology of them,
Hmm.
and I did an episode on dog-headed men too. So it's an interesting thing. We were talking about the difference between different Bigfoot. Well, there's the same thing when it comes to dogmen too. You know, you've
Yeah, it kind of
got
splits similar lines. Like the werewolves could be more the occult magic side, whereas Dogmen
hmm
could be more flesh and blood.
Yeah.
But even then, where do they come from? I don't know if I agree with like I think it's Jay from Cryptozoics Corn that says movies are soft closure, but
Yeah.
I can't help but think of like the Underworld movies. Did you ever see that? See those films, Underworld? Because they talk about like the bloodlines, whether you have the original one that was William, you have first generations that couldn't turn back to human form, and then you kind of had like a Blade situation when a woman who was pregnant was bitten that gave birth to the first lichen that could change back and forth. And it's like, I don't know, could something like that happen? That could be an explanation.
Man, I don't know. And there's so many different possibilities with it. And when it comes to just the idea of lycanthropy in general, I mean, the idea's been around for ages. You can go all the way back to, Greek mythology, and that's one of the things that I talked about in that episode was just, the origins of the idea of lycanthropy and lichens and werewolves, and then kind of what it spawned off into in more of the modern era. But did it also change during the modern era too in reality? So that's something we have to think about too, especially when we're talking about magic and the occult. I don't know exactly, did different rituals change over time too? I mean, you gotta suspect they did. So I don't know. I think that it's a mixed bag. It's just like Bigfoot. It's a mixed bag, and people may see something that looks like some sort of werewolf or dogman, but it could be back to what we said with the Bigfoot. It could be like a fae or a fairy or something that's mimicking this image, and it's not actually that image at all. It could just be something paranormal, more in the woo realm. So yeah, you probably got flesh and blood, and you've got different options there, and then you probably got something that's more on the paranormal or supernatural side too.
Yeah, I know Tony has brought up stories of it seeming like they kind of phase in, like I brought up, like the layering of realities. Something's coming through, and the longer they're here, the more visible. Um, but yeah, I think Dogman's another kind of te umbrella term that we really don't know. We just have categories for them. But I definitely want to go out and see one.
Yeah.
I don't want to go go out alone. That's why I'm trying to go with my buddy and uh, maybe some other people down the line. I know when I went up to Joshua Tree the first time, I camped out and I lost signal before I got to the campsite, so I scared my wife. So she says I can't go out anymore by myself, which is, understandable considering. She's more worried
Right.
of the human aspect than, cryptids. Uh, but yeah, I think I could talk about them all day. Cryptids are, I think it was Bigfoot, werewolves, and like sea creatures was like the top three for me growing up. Although I was fascinated with. But we've
Yeah.
been going what, like an hour, 10 minutes? I don't know how much longer I have, so I want to bring up the last one. Um, I titled it Alchemy, but it's much more narrowed on like the Philosopher's Stone. Um, because I was listening to Cat Williams
Yeah.
on Joe Rogan, and they had mentioned emerald tablets, and then I had on my algorithm on YouTube, the Wi-Fi files popped up, talking more in detail about the emerald tablets, and they brought up this book. Um, I don't know if you heard about it, but I think it'd be interesting for you to dive into, called the Age of Aquarius. I have two episodes with you brought up
Yeah.
one
I know
all
the book.
huh? You've heard of it? I've done two episodes with one on all the kind of
The
using
Age of
it
Aquarius. Yes.
as a basis. What do you think about it? Do you think it could be accurate, or is it just a bunch of baloney?
It's interesting. Again, it's one of those books where when I look at it, there's probably definitely some truths in it. I don't know if we can take any book and say, well, this is just the truth through and through. But when it comes to, and I know you had brought up to me about the Philosopher's Stone, and I guess it depends on what you believe that the Philosopher's Stone is, right? There's so many different ideas of the Philosopher's Stone, and we know that the main idea of it, it's a substance, and it's a substance that can help turn base metals like mercury into gold, silver, and the other idea, though, is that it's deeper than that. It's more of like an elixir of life, and it can create rejuvenation or immortality. And I think that in some ways too, we've got alchemists that tried to complete the magnum opus, and part of their magnum opus or the great work was to discover the philosopher's stone. And we know that the earliest mention of the philosopher's stone was Zosimus of Panopolis, and he, was Gnostic mystic. There's that Gnosticism again that comes up. And, he came up in Egypt, and he was one of the first ones to talk about it. And the way that he talked about it was more in the sense of it was like a substance. And I think when we look at it from that aspect is when we start getting into the different parts of it, like the anima mundi or the soul of the world, the prima materia. I like to talk about the azoth a lot too, because it's a solvent that's found in alchemy that can change different elements too. It's just such a broad term in the alchemical world about what actually is the philosopher's stone, right? Is it just a substance like this azoth or the prima materia that's what God's made of, right? That's what some people say, that it comes from God himself and it's something that we can get access to if we can create it. And then that's what allows us to move past this matrix prison that we're in. And, you know, you look at Falconelli, right? Falconelli would have discovered the Philosopher's Stone, and he was said to have been able to even change his gender and move in and out of different formats physically. So I guess at the base level, in my opinion, when it comes to the Philosopher's Stone, I don't know if it's just one particular thing. And I know that, again, the basic way of talking about it is it's a solvent that can help change metals into gold or silver. This is where some of these alchemists became wealthy because they were able to create all this gold or essentially money out of it. And I'm not saying that's not part of it too, but what is the solvent? What is the substance, right? And that's been at the debate since the idea of the Philosopher's Stone came up. And, I've done an episode on David and Goliath, and I argued that his stones that he pulled from the brook were in conjunction with this Philosopher's Stone idea, that it changed into a different type of stone before it hit Goliath, that it transmuted in midair. So I think that's some way that we can look at it biblically, that this idea of the Philosopher's Stone is something connected to the ethereal realm, to another realm, to the gods, quote unquote. So I don't think that the alchemists were off with it. Maybe they were manipulated into thinking that it was a certain thing from whatever entities they were talking to. You know, it's really, it's kind of like we were just talking about cryptids, where I could look at about 4 or 5 different things and say these could be Philosopher's Stone, and maybe I'm right with all of it, maybe I'm wrong with all of it, maybe it's something completely different. But I think at the root core, this is of course just my opinion and the things that I've read, I don't think that it's an actual stone. I think that it's some sort of material, some sort of essence that's used to manipulate matter. And I think that's probably more in tune with what we're looking at when it comes to the alchemical side of it.
Yeah, that's kind of what the book lays out. It will quote like old texts and then give, their opinion. Uh, they say it's much, um, they use the term like life energy, but I would say if you're going back to the concept that everything was created by God, it should be, God energy. And that's kind of what the stone is this concentrated mass of, God energy. And so in that aspect, I think it kind of applies to kind of everything, It is a solid mass, so you could call it a stone, but it's really not because I think the book says that if you heat it up, you can liquefy it, and that's kind of like the elixir of life. You can drink it, you can use that to make homunculi or whatever else you want to do. So it's a very interesting book, and I think you brought up too about some people think it's a process to purify yourself. And I do think that's part of it. If you get closer to God, maybe you can get more of that God energy. If you eat more, it states like your diet. If you eat more like meats and vegetables, that's more organic, more fresh from the ground and stuff, you can get more of that God energy. And then, um, I don't know if you heard this part, but in the book it does state that like urine is the material you use to create it. And because it talks about like cycles, one of the cycles is like the digestive system. It, a lot of things just want to kind of purify substances to its maximum form, and that ties into, the gold aspect. If you introduce it to metal, it's gonna want to purify to its ultimate form, which is gold. Um, so I just find it interesting that you just keep adding this material on top of itself, and then it condenses. It's interesting. Um, but it was saying, I thought it was funny. It mentions in the book that cultists they paint stuff. Um, how would you say? Like they put stuff in your face. It's hidden knowledge, and they were saying like the Order of the Golden Dawn is named that because urine, like golden shower, and that the best time to collect it is at dawn. I thought that was interesting. I don't know if there's any truth to that. That's why they named it. But I thought it was an interesting connection to like Crowley and stuff. Um, but collecting at dawn, I think, makes some sense when you think about like all the release of the chemicals and like while you're actually dreaming. That's like the latter half of the sleep cycle towards the end before you wake up. So you have that release of chemicals. Maybe that could do have something to do with it. I know the cryptid huntress brought up a while back that there are trace amounts of gold in people's urine, like really small stuff. So maybe in like the ancient times, like in Egypt, she was saying maybe they could have had like waste facilities collecting that gold too from like the Nephilim or whatever. I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, for sure, man. And that's a lot of interesting ways of looking at it.
Hmm.
And again, I'm very open-minded when it comes to what the Philosopher's Stone actually is. And I think it's a fascinating case study on what is the Philosopher's Stone to each person. Is it something different to each person that is trying to complete this great work? Does it become something completely different? Does the essence itself that someone discovers, does it become what you want it to be? That's the other way of looking at it too. And I don't know. And I think that none of us will ever actually know. We could do all the research in the world, but we're just all, stabbing at the dark. And I think even the alchemists who quote unquote discovered it, I don't think that they could even say exactly what it was because it operated differently for different people and depending on what they were trying to do with it. So, it's I would lend toward it being some sort of life force, right? I don't know exactly what that is, and I'm not going to necessarily say it's the life force of God, but it's something that is ethereal. It's not of this world, and if we get access to it like these alchemists have, you know, what are they manipulating it to do and what other entities are involved with this too, and that's something you have to think long and hard with. You look at John Dee and Edward Kelly and the Enochian Aethers and them completing that great work, and you know understanding the Enochian language, and that's their version of it, right? So you got all these different ones that have gone throughout history, and I think at the root core of it, I believe that whatever this essence is, it's it can be manipulated to perform differently for different people. Maybe that's the best way I can, give you an answer for that.
Yeah, I do think they could be different ways to create it. Like you brought up the David and Goliath. If it is like just concentrated energy, then it does make sense. God could have created, concentrated that energy in the stone, to kill a Nephilim. If you're going down, that route. I know it does state that it does help, unlock the third eye. If you swallow the stone, it will heal you. And if it's healing you, maybe you can, what is it? Decrystallize like the pineal gland, open your third eye more. I think it said that it could help with astral projection. You can stay out a bit longer. So I definitely think you can interact with some entities if you're using that, trying to go those routes.
Yeah, that's I've heard those too. So, it's possible. It's definitely possible. I don't know. I've never had the substance in front of me to be able to test it. So,
Mm.
who knows, right? We're
I mean, if
stabbing in
there's
the dark
one,
like we are with cryptids with a lot of this.
sorry. Yeah, I mean, I definitely, if I could find the recipe, I definitely would love to try to make the stone, but, how do you know?
Right. Exactly.
I think we're coming up on an hour and a half. Do you know how much more time you have, or do you want to call it?
I'm right at the end right now.
Yeah, if you gotta go, I wouldn't want to keep you. That's pretty much, for having you on for the first time. I think we covered a lot of different kind of general topics about things I'm interested in that you also look into and cover. So I want to say thank you for coming on. It was a honor, as a fan. Thank you for coming on.
It, I appreciate it, Alex, and I had a great time. And, you know, I am honored that you listen to the podcast. I say that to everybody. You know, the podcast goes nowhere without people listening to it. And I'm glad people are resonating with some of the things I'm saying. And hopefully that I'm encouraging people to live life to the fullest and live life for your families and live life out of the rabbit hole, no matter how deep you might go, that we need to have communities and family and connect to the world around us. And sometimes, even though things look bleak and dark, that, ultimately, that we can help create something better. And hopefully with God, if we find that connection with God, we're able to do that. And I think it also makes us understand that the world's not as bleak as it looks from, all the craziness that we see on social media everywhere else. And that's the one thing that I try to tell people all the time on my show. And anytime I come on other people's shows is that it's not as bad as they're presenting it, but it doesn't mean that everything's great either. But also, we can help change some of that at the ground level. And I hope that I can be a part of doing that and helping others. And even if it has nothing to do with conspiracies or anything like that, but if I can just give a helping hand to someone else in their time of need, then that means more to me than finding out if, there's a hidden Rothschild in the White House. So,
Oh yeah. Um, was it Hillary and George Bush they have connections to like Crowley, which is interesting. Do like the grandparents or something? I think they're all a
it's
lot of
interesting.
yeah, I think they're all a lot of coincidences. Things just happen, but there's also seem like there's a plan underneath it all.
Absolutely. There's always a plan underneath it, but at the end of the day, we also don't need to live in fear and we need to live life full. And, and that's the thing. I think it's fun and it can be important at times to look deep into things and understand, where things are going in the world around us. But at the same time, I think that you've told me before you're a family man, and I think that that's really where it starts is your family, what you build with your family, what you equip your children for the future, and teaching them to not live in fear and love life and love people around them. And you talked about love a lot on the show too, and I think that's important. I think how we care and love other people, even if they think differently than us, is very important.
Yeah, we can disagree on things. It's just, but we can also respect each other too. And people get too strung up on like personal beliefs and stuff like that. Do you want to shout anything out again before we go?
I would say go to Linktree/Joel Thomas Media, and you can get to everything I do. You can get to the podcast there, you can get to the music there, you can also get to the films there. And again, I've got the new film, The Meadow Project, coming out this Sunday, the 27th of July at moment.co/the Meadow Project. It'll be a live premiere, and then we'll be doing a live Q&A afterwards. And then the film will hit streaming after that, and you'll be able to purchase it or rent it or whatever.
Definitely gonna check it out. All right, you have a good rest of the day, man.
You too, Alex. I appreciate it.
Thank you. See ya.